Passage. We are thrilled to have you here. Book Passage has been around for almost 40 years. Wow. You can believe that. We are one of the largest remaining independent bookstores, and we are very, very proud of that fact. And we all read the newspapers. There's plenty of retailers shutting their doors, filing for bankruptcy, but not Book Passage. We now have 3 locations. So this is our newest store. This is the Sausalito store that you're sitting in. We also have our main branch, which is in Corte Madera. We also have a location in the Ferry Building in San Francisco. So if you haven't been to all the locations, please come by. We'd love to have you. We do so much more than just, we have author readings, which are great, but we also have all kinds of classes. We have language classes, we have writing classes, we have book groups, we have children's classes, we have music classes. So we have all kinds of things going on. There should be newsletters on your chairs, so take a look at those. Our website is up to date too, so please make sure you take a look at that. We don't want you to miss any events. We have Janet Napolitano coming up the end of June. She's going to be in the Corte Madera store. Jill Biden was in the store about 10 days ago. We had a big event with about 300 people for her book.
Wow.
So we have all kinds of really big names. And it's just amazing that these are all free events. They're free here in Marin County. You don't have to go very far. So thank you for being customers of Book Passage. Our mission is to engage and inspire, and we hope that we can continue to do that. Thank you for being customers. We want to keep our doors open for another 40 years. Thank you very much. So we are thrilled today. We have 2 authors. We have Tracy Grant here, who's going to talk about her new book, but we also have Melanie, who is also an author, and she's going to come up and do an introduction. So the floor is yours, kiddo.
And honey, real quick before you come up, can you glance at the phone and see if it's saying, it's got a funny message on it, is it saying it's not doing something?
Nope, it says I'm watching. It tells the name of people who are watching, and I check my phone and it's live.
If you're watching live on Facebook, we hope this is working. Thank you.
Hello, I am Malcolm Mélanie Rannoch, daughter of Tracy Grant. My mommy, we're having this book event for my mommy's newest book. It has a lot of mystery, and and I've never read it, but I know that it's gonna be good. Thank you.
Great intro.
And 2 questions before I start. Does anybody mind, because we're trying to live stream this, does anybody mind that if you ask questions in the Q&A, does anybody object to their question showing up, at least their voice being on Facebook? Cool. And could somebody who has a cell phone take a couple of pictures while we're talking, because I can't take pictures with my phone, because obviously it's being used. Thank you all so much for being here. I so appreciate it. I forgot to print my talk last night, the early part of it, before I start reading. So I'm going to have to hold my computer for the little part at the beginning. I'm so glad you guys are all here. Very exciting. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Melanie.
You're welcome.
I've always tended to write characters who have complicated histories before they even appear on the page in the book. This far into a series, it's a given that all the characters, ongoing characters, have complicated pasts. But oddly, though we know a fair amount in the series about Mélanie Rannoch, the central character, who my daughter is named after, we know a fair amount about her past, and about her husband Malcolm's childhood and their marriage, readers of the series didn't really know anything about Malcolm's romantic history before this book. And neither did Melanie, his wife, until she literally meets Malcolm's past in a Mayfair ballroom. That scene was the opening of the book for a long time, but in the revision process, it occurred to me I needed to set the history up more. So I added a brief prologue, which I'm going to read along with the first chapter. As I read it, imagine how the book might have been different if I'd opened with the ball scene in chapter 1 rather than with the prologue. By the way, if anyone watched the most recent season of Victoria on PBS, did anybody watch it? Okay. Well, if you happen to have watched Victoria on PBS, if anybody who's watching on Facebook did, you might recognize Lord Palmerston, the Foreign Secretary from that season of Victoria, and his wife Emily, who had big roles to play. They're in this book a couple of decades earlier and before they were married. So it was very fun to, while I was writing the book, to see them on Victoria.
Interesting.
The Glenister Papers, chapter prologue. The oil lamp swayed with the opening of the door. A gust of wind rushed into the tavern, bringing the salt tang of the sea. He didn't let himself look at the door, but he knew the man he had come here to meet had arrived. He took a sip of wine and stared at the red liquid in the dark wood of the table until his visitor dropped into the chair opposite him. Then, secure in the shadows, he risked a look at the man who had shaped so much of his life and whom he had only come to understand, he had only really come to understand recently. No difficulties, he asked the visitor? None. Easy to go undetected when no one is looking for you. His visitor picked up the bottle from the table and poured himself a glass of wine. This must be important if you risked a meeting. It is. His visitor took a sip of wine. We're going to have to take action. She's become too great a liability. His own glass tilted in his fingers. He righted it. Surely, after all these years, the situation in Spain has changed things. Questions are going to be asked. We can't afford to have secrets bubbling to the surface, now of all times. But if they haven't before, it's too great a risk, especially with Malcolm back in Britain, back in Parliament, and that wife of his. Do you really want the pair of them asking questions? The wine turned sour on his tongue. Malcolm is a threat. We'd both be fools to think otherwise. With just a few of the pieces, he could put the whole puzzle together alarmingly quickly. So we need to make sure he doesn't get any at all. Meaning? His visitor sat back in his chair and took a long drink of wine. Before she can talk to Malcolm, or anyone else, you need to silence her. Permanently. Chapter 1. London, September 1819. Malcolm Rannoch cast a glance round the ballroom. Gilded moldings, potted palms, vases of hothouse roses, pale gowns adorned with ribbon and rosettes, jewels flashing in the light of wax tapers, round necks and wrists dangling from earlobes, wound through elaborately dressed hair, dark coats, the gleam of starched cravats, the clink of crystal glasses holding champagne that would have grown warm despite an exorbitant expense on ice. The strains of a waltz played too loudly to try to compete with the buzz of conversation. The heat of too many bodies pressed into too small a room. Remind me again what we're doing here, he murmured. Melanie curled her gloved fingers round his arm. You need Sir Winston for your capital punishment bill. You promised Rupert. Malcolm looked down into his wife's sea green eyes. And we were going to stop playing these games. Melanie smiled. From her glossy side curls to her pearl and diamond earrings to the perfect folds of her gown, she had the polished look of a beau-monde wife. A look he hadn't seen on her for a long time. We can't entirely stop playing them, darling, she said. You're an MP. Malcolm turned to Laura and Raoul O'Rourke. And somehow you got pulled into it. There are a number of Spaniards here, Raoul said. He had a diamond pin in his cravat. A lot of evenings at home he didn't even wear a cravat. And a number of British politicians I can talk to about Spain. And James and Hetty, Laura said. Besides, it was an excuse to order a new gown, Melanie said. Oh well, Malcolm smiled at his wife. Why didn't you say so to begin with? Such a charming gown certainly deserves an outing. A smile totally unlike the polished look of a moment before broke across Melanie's face. Confess it, Malcolm, you didn't realize it was new until just now. Malcolm took in the rose gauze, softly pleated and fastened with pearl clasps over ivory satin. But I did notice you were looking particularly lovely. The perfect answer. Laura looked at Raoul. I hope you're taking notes. He'd have noticed you have a new gown. Welcome. Come sit down and help yourselves to food and drink if you want. He'd have noticed you have a new gown, Malcolm said. O'Rourke's attention to detail is flawless. Melanie unfurled a silk fan he'd given her in Vienna. Laura's is new too. Of course it is, Raoul said, and stunning. Liar. Laura smiled at her husband. Raoul lifted her hand to his lips. I'm not lying about your being stunning. Heavens, only a few months and I seem to have forgot how crowded Mayfair ballrooms get. Cordelia Davenport joined them in a swirl of outer satin, her arm linked through her husband Harry's. Let me guess, Malcolm said. You have a new gown. How perceptive of you, Malcolm. Cordelia smiled at him. Harry didn't notice. Deduction. I didn't notice Nell's or Laura's, but it finally occurred to me that the three of you went shopping together. One would almost think you were a spy, Harry said. But then I'd never think you all bought new gowns simply to intrigue your husband. If so, you know you have no need of gowns to do so. You're brilliant, Harry. Melanie smiled at him. Harry stopped a waiter and procured glasses of champagne to hand round. Remind me of why we're here, besides the gowns. Politics, Melanie said. Spain, Raoul said. Family, Laura said. And tracking the league, Malcolm added. I'm so glad you're all here. You must know I count it quite a social coup to have captured you. Emily Cooper, their hostess, swept up beside them. Her gown of peacock satin was almost certainly new as well, and her dark ringlets were threaded through with a turquoise bandeau. But she had the same mischievous smile of the girl Malcolm had known since the nursery. Malcolm kissed her cheek. I don't think having some of your oldest friends enjoy your bountiful hospitality can quite be called a coup, Em, not by your standards. It can when my friends have made themselves as woefully scarce as all of you in recent months. It's quite a trick for increasing social capital. Not that I imagine that occurred to you for a moment. She turned to Laura and Raoul. You look as though you're finding marriage agreeable. I can't tell you how happy I am that things worked out so well for you. Your baby girl must have grown prodigiously since I saw her last. They do change so quickly. She put a hand to her own stomach, rounded it slightly with her fifth child. Clara is a wonder, Raoul said, at least to her parents. As all children should be. Emily smiled and turned to Cordelia. Cordy, I count on you to help me with Caro if she's difficult tonight. She grimaced for a moment at the thought of her sister-in-law, Lady Carolyn Lamb. Malcolm, Rupert Carruthers is looking for you. Something about Sir Winston Featherstone and capital punishment. I sometimes think more political business is transacted in my reception room than in the halls of Westminster, which does rather make all the fuss and bother worth it. She looked at Melanie. You can't tell me you don't miss it. I miss the political world, Melanie said. Not that you've precisely left it, Emily said. There's something wonderfully bohemian about the parties you give now. I'm rather envious. Nonsense, tonight couldn't be more perfect, Melanie said. Emily cast an appraising glance round the room. It's a dreadful squeeze that people would say the turnout was insipid if it weren't. You may laugh, but your presence really is adding cachet. A number of people have asked me how I coaxed all of you to come. We have several Spanish guests. I thought perhaps that was the lure. Ah, yes. She glanced across the room and smiled. Even as Emily spoke, a flash of movement across the room caught Malcolm's eye. An echo of memory that sent him spinning back 8 years before the rich gold of her hair and the swirling green of her gown quite registered. Candlelight shimmered off damask wall hangings and gilded paint. Champagne glasses clinked. Voices and the strains of a waltz pinged off the coffered ceiling. The sights and sounds he had known all his life, here and abroad. People he had known all his life were all round him. And for a moment, like a trick of theatrical illusion, it was all gone, and he was rooted to the ground, staring across the ballroom at a ghost. Darling, his wife's familiar voice cut the stillness. Sorry, someone I haven't seen for a long time. I had no notion she was back in London. Of course, Emily said in a bright voice that was perhaps a shade too bright. You must have known Mrs. Ashford in the peninsula. A bit, Malcolm said. The Ashfords are connected on my husband's side, Emily said, but I only met her this evening myself. Raoul, Laura, Harry, and Cordy had gone completely still, their gazes carefully not quite on him or Melanie. Melanie's own gaze was a little questioning. He'd seen their friends in similar situations. He should warn Melanie, but how to do it so quickly? He and Mel had always been quick to communicate, but this was something he scarcely even had the language for. He met her gaze for a moment and saw a glimmering of understanding flash in her eyes. And then it was too late.
That's my log.
That's okay, Sabrina. Because his ghost was no longer across the room, but standing before them. Mrs. Ashford, Emily stepped into the conversational breach. I'm so glad you could join us, and so glad you found old friends. Thank you, Lady Cooper. Kitty turned to Malcolm. Mr. Rannoch. Her voice was more restrained than he remembered, but it still held us with that faint undercurrent that hinted she was laughing, both at the world and at herself. It's been a long time. Mrs. Ashford. Rather to his own surprise, his voice came out sounding close to normal. I had no notion you were in Britain. She smiled, a practiced smile that belonged to the ballroom, very different from the ironic tilt of her mouth that burned in his memory. We've only just arrived from the Argentine. So fascinating, Emily said. I should quite like, oh dear, I see one of the footmen beckoning. Malcolm, may I leave it to you to make the introductions? May I present my wife, Melanie? Familiar social ritual came to his rescue, like lines from a well-rehearsed play. Darling, Catalina Ashford. I knew her in Lisbon, but she and her husband left for the Argentine before I met you. Mrs. Ashford. Melanie's smile was faultless. Mrs. Rannoch. So was Kitty's. I believe you met Colonel Davenport in Lisbon, Malcolm said, though not Lady Cordelia. And of course you know Aurora, he added, wondering just how much Raoul knew about Kitty and her activities, and Malcolm's own involvement with her. But I don't believe you'd met his wife, Laura. Kitty shook hands with Laura and Cordelia. Was it his imagination, Malcolm wondered, that their interaction was slightly different from the same one between Kitty and Melanie? I heard Malcolm had married, Kitty said. I didn't realize you had as well, Mr. O'Rourke. My felicitations. Thank you. It was very recent, Raoul said. Kitty gave another of her practiced smiles. A number of things have changed for all of us, but then I imagine the end of the war shifted things for everyone, especially those of you who remained in Britain. We felt very far from things in Argentina, though we did get news from home, of course. Kitty turned to Melanie. I was so pleased to hear Malcolm had found happiness. Your brilliance is talked of even in South America. Melanie's answering smile was also one she reserved for social occasions. You're very kind, Mrs. Ashford, though I know exaggeration is part of the language of diplomacy, but not among friends. Kitty gave another smile, slightly less controlled. I confess it's quite a relief to meet old friends from the peninsula. Are you in Britain long, Malcolm asked. I'm not sure yet. Kitty fingered the sticks of her fan. I decided to bring my children back rather suddenly. My husband died last year. It was like cold water sluicing down his back. Of course, at this point, her being a widow could hardly matter. Not to him. Not except that it might give Kit a chance for a happier life. I'm sorry, he said, using the language of diplomacy. My deepest condolences. Thank you. Kitty's voice was steady, her gaze composed. It was a shock. But when one is married to a soldier, one is always prepared to some degree. I'm so very sorry, Laura said. My father is a former soldier. My husband was one as well, though he didn't die in battle. Much as one knows the risks, I don't think one is ever quite prepared for it. Laura almost never talked about her first husband. Malcolm had the honest sense she was attempting to come to everyone's conversational rescue. We saw so many of our friends fall on the peninsula and at Waterloo. Melanie's voice was warm with sympathy. Malcolm thought only he would have caught the slight tremor that ran through her. I'm so sorry. It must be particularly hard for your children. Yes, Kitty said, though they are also a great comfort. I'm sure having been married to Malcolm for almost 7 years, you aren't a stranger to caring for your husband. Lady Cordelia can't be. I imagine Mrs. O'Rourke isn't either, though she's been married for a shorter time. Laura tucked her arm through Raoul's. I would almost say the fears are commonplace, except that they never could be. I was greatly relieved when Harry sold out, Cordelia said. I confess I was terrified for Malcolm, particularly at Waterloo, for all he wasn't a soldier, Melanie said. Malcolm always ran his own risks, Kitty said. Not so much anymore. Malcolm pressed Melanie's arm closer to his side. Kitty gave a lopsided smile, very different from her practiced smiles earlier. It had the familiarity of a book that suddenly falls open to a well-worn page. But then you would never admit to them, would you? If you mean I always avoided exaggeration, then you are perfectly correct. My point precisely. I imagine Mrs. Rannoch is quite familiar with your habit of understatement. Perfectly. Melanie smiled at Kitty. Whereas Mr. O'Rourke never made a secret of the dangers he ran, Kitty said. Merely the details of those dangers. My work is much less dangerous these days, Raoul said. Which doesn't mean not dangerous. Laura smiled at him with ironic affection. All things were relative. But perhaps the dangers we all face are simply different these days, Kitty said. Well put, Mrs. Ashford, Harry said. You must call on us while you were in London, Mrs. Ashford, Melanie said, and bring your children. Our son and daughter would love to meet them. The O'Rourkes and their daughters live with us as well, and the Davenports and their daughters are frequently at our house. That would be delightful. Perhaps Lord Palmerston. Kitty turned to smile at Palmerston, the Secretary of War, who had strolled up to join them. I found some old friends. Delighted to see it. Palmerston leaned against one of the gilded columns, legs crossed at the ankle. He was very much at home in this house. You've also found some of the most convivial company in the ballroom. No risk of boredom in this circle, which is more than can be said of most conversational groupings in a Mayfair ballroom. I didn't realize you were acquainted, Malcolm said. There were, it seemed, any number of things he didn't know about Kitty. We just met this evening, Kitty said. Lady Cooper introduced us. That was somewhat surprising, given that Emily and Palmerston had been lovers for close to a decade, and that Palmerston obviously appreciated Kitty. I've been fascinated to hear about the situation in Argentina, Palmerston said. And I've heard that that you're the government minister with the keenest insights into foreign affairs, Kitty said. Palmerston laughed. Don't let Castlereagh hear you say so, but I'll admit the developments in South America recently are of particular interest. They seem to have discovered revolution just when it's gone out of fashion on the continent. So I imagine our work would like nothing better than for us all to jump in and support a revolution in Spain. There's no revolution to support, Raoul said. Yet. Palmerston's smile was easy and razor sharp. With someone of your expertise working there, I doubt the situation will continue indefinitely, which will leave Britain with some interesting choices. But tonight we have more pleasant pursuits to indulge in. I came to play Mrs. Ashford for a waltz she promised me. Of course. Kitty put her hand on Palmerston's arm. Do pray excuse me, she said to the others in general. I look forward to talking later. A few civil words and Kitty was gone in a swirl of silk and sparkling green, leaving silence in her wake. I hadn't heard about Ashford. Harry stepped into the conversational void with his usual keenness. We were in different regiments. I didn't know him well. Malcolm also hadn't known Harry all that well 8 years ago. There was no reason Harry should know about Malcolm's relationship with Kitty. None except that he was Harry. I had no notion she was back, Malcolm said, aware that of the need to fill the void with something approaching normality. He glanced at Raoul. Did you? No, Raoul said in an easy voice that gave little away. Like you, I hadn't even heard Ashford had died. And there was no particular reason Raoul should know. None except that he was Raoul. Has she ever been to England before, Laura asked. I don't think so, Malcolm said. She married Ashford in the peninsula. Rannoch. Rupert Carruthers clapped Malcolm on the shoulder. Thank you for being here. Or perhaps I should thank Melanie. He shot a smile at her. Come with me. Sir Winston is in the card room and he's just won a hand, so he's in an agreeable mood. Forgive us. He gave a smile that encompassed the others. Believe me, I'd like nothing more than to talk to friends. I promise I'll return him in time to dance, Melanie. No need to worry about that. Melanie gave an easy smile and released Malcolm's arm. The last reason an MP goes to a political party is to dance with his own wife. And that's the end of chapter 1.
Absolutely.
Now, I'd be happy to answer any questions people have. Anybody wants to ask questions? Yes, Melanie, thank you for starting.
How does Melanie actually get back in time?
How does Melanie get back in time from you to her?
No, I mean actually in the book.
Oh, well, because she lives in a historical time in the book. The Melanie in the books lives a long time ago. She was born in 1793 in the books.
So she went back. So she went. How far back in time did she go?
Oh, you mean because I'm talking about her learning about Malcolm's past?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's a good point. She finds out about his past. She isn't actually going back in time physically, like in a time travel story, but she's learning about what happened in the past because she's meeting somebody that he knew in the past and that he was in love with before he met her.
Mom, she doesn't.
Yeah, I know. Serena,
What does that mean?
what is what?
What does that mean?
What I just said? So it's a book about people learning about things that happened to people they knew before they met them. So like if you learned about something that happened to your mom and dad before you were born. Like when your mom and dad tell you about their wedding before you were born?
Or
Yeah.
like if you told me about something like stuff at college before I was.
Exactly. Like you learned about who I was when I was in college. Exactly.
That makes a
That
lot
was
of
a long,
sense.
yeah, a long time before you were born. So Melanie in the book is learning about who her husband was before she met him.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, and and he was sort of a different person before she met him. So yeah, I think
Wow.
Cheryl has a question.
Your books are just so historically rich. You know, we really feel like we are in that time period.
Thank
And
you.
I read something on your bio that you've always loved history and that's always been a big part of your life.
Yeah.
Now, do you enjoy the research part? And do you
I do.
where and how do you do your research?
So I do it in a lot of different ways. I read a lot of letters and diaries and
Wow.
from periods of the era. Now you can go online, which is great. So there's stuff I can find online. There's a sequence in the book later set at Vauxhall Gardens, which were these outdoor pleasure gardens where people, where Handel had performed at one point, and there's a character who's a former spy who's a singer, which was fun because in my other life I worked for an opera training program, so it's fun to have music in the books. So anyway, so when I was writing the Vauxhall sequence, I found pictures, like prints that were done then of what it looked like, and I just found all these websites, so I was sitting at home and I could look all these things up. But then there was a book I wanted about Lord Palmerston and Emily Cooper that I had read years ago, but I wanted to go back to it because they're important in the book, and it's not digital. But I found, because the library system now is everything's online, I found through a Google search that it was in the Dominican College Library, Dominican University now library, and that you could get books out there now if you had a Marin County library card. So I was able to go out. I dragged Melanie to the Dominican University campus one night. It was a cold night and we had coals, and it was dark because it was winter and it was dark early, and and Siri on my iPhone didn't quite get where the library was because you had to park and walk across the campus strip. But we found the book. It was really great. I went back into the DA stacks, which is a call number I remember very well from college, because that's where British history is. So, yeah, Serena?
Can you read more?
Oh, that's a lovely compliment, Serena. You know, I'm not going to read more right now, but I could read more to you sometime, okay? But that's very sweet that you want me to read more. I'm very flattered. Yeah, Eve?
I'm just amazed every year at how you have new ideas and plot twists that I don't see coming. How the heck do you do it?
I've always liked plotting. I spend a lot of time thinking. I'll sometimes sit back and go, okay, what's the most unexpected thing I can think of that will happen? Sometimes if I'm stuck, I'll make lists of sort of what could happen that's completely off the wall, and I'll let myself write down things that I would never actually do. You know, I would probably never actually, but sometimes doing that triggers things, and then I find that if I go do something else, that's where it actually helps to have another job sometimes, or to get up and clean the house or something, and things start to percolate in your mind. I do a lot of good thinking. We go to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival 3 times a year. I do a lot of good thinking on those drives, and I was thinking about the next book on. We were just there a couple of weeks ago, and I was thinking about the next book, and a lot of ideas started to come, kind of percolate and come into place. And then, I mean, because it's an ongoing series, and there are some, even though the central mystery is wrapped up in each book, there are arcs that go on over multiple books. So I actually have some twists in my, like, for instance, which is, I think, frustrating some people in the Goodreads group that talks about books. Hello, if any of you are hearing this. The two people in the opening prologue, by the end of the book, it's clear who one of them is. The one whose point of view you're in, who that person is clear. The other person, it isn't. You know, he knows. You're the copy editor. It's not clear. There's some hints. I think it might be possible to guess it, but no. Anyway, people haven't been able to figure it out, and that's going to come out in a later book. And people have asked me if I'm going to say, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to say right now because it's a big spoiler for what's coming up next. So Eve, I'm going to ask that question as my copy editor for the book. Fabulous. Yes, Melanie.
Is it done?
No, we're not done yet. But you're.
Got it. I
Yes,
was just wondering.
she has a speech to do at the very end. So I'll make sure you can do your closing speech.
Oh
Okay.
no, I didn't want it to happen. I didn't want it to be done right now. I was just asking.
I'll make sure you know when it's done. Thank you. Check.
Which
Yeah.
which Melanie was first, Miss Melanie or the one in the book?
The book,
one in the
Mel,
book.
the one in the books. Yes, she knows that. Yeah, and for a while I wasn't going to name her Melanie because I was going to make Melanie her middle name because I was sort of, but I really liked it. And then my cousin Julianne, Ann knows, said, "Oh, you should use it. It's a pretty name, and you like it so much." So I ended up naming her Melanie. And actually, my Melanie's middle name is Cordelia, who's another character in the books.
Oh.
So both her names come from the book. And also, I like the Cordelia is also a Shakespeare name. And it's a pop culture name because it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I actually like all three of them. But it ties together my book, Shakespeare, and pop culture.
Very, very nice.
Yeah, Cheryl?
So, now is this the 17th book? Is that?
It is if you count. I do novellas. I do a novella and a book every year. So the novellas come out in November and the books come out. I've been doing that for the whole series, but I've been doing that for a while. So if you count the novellas, which are shorter, but they're nice because it lets me keep the series going, and it lets me show things that I might not show in a full book. Like when when Raoul and Laura got married and had their baby. That was in the last novella because I kind of wanted to see that, but I didn't want it to dominate a whole. It would have been weird in the middle of a big long mystery, but that was something I could cover.
You are quite prolific and very
Yes.
talented. And
Very much.
you have so many, all these, I mean, how do you walk around with a notebook or like do you put stuff on your phone, like all these do the ideas pop into your head and you just gotta keep track of
I
them?
keep a lot. Most of them I keep in my head. I mean, I do make notes on my phone sometimes. I used to have a printed day timer. Way after we had telephones, I used to carry a day timer around in my bag, and I would sit sometimes when I had free moments in cafes and write things down. Now it's more like the notes function. In fact, and if anybody who has an iPhone, there's a part of it at the front where it'll scroll through and it'll bring up stuff like headlines and things from different apps. So I glanced at it and I saw this the dead body in warehouse, murder or break-in, and I'm like, oh my God, there's some horrible news headline. Why do they put such horrible things in these news headlines? This news headline showing up, and it wasn't. It was a note for one of my books. It was like a black note that was showing up on the, and I realized that a minute later. But then I write in a program called Scrivener that is really great, and it has a corkboard function. So I used to do index cards with plot ideas and lay them out on my dining room table, and then my cats would mess them up and things. And then when Melanie was little, she could get into them. But so now Scrivener has an online, a digital corkboard, which is great. So you can put ideas for scenes down, and then you can move things around. And I even have it. I have one for the whole series, so I have things that are coming up later. Yeah, Serena?
What's the book called?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I said that. It's called the Glenister Papers, because it's not clear from the part I read, but there's a man named Lord Glenister who comes in a little bit later. He has some papers that are missing, and he wants Malcolm, the hero, and Mélanie, the heroine, to find them. But they're not quite sure he's telling the truth about them. Uh-huh.
Did you write Melanie in the book because her name's Melanie?
I actually named my daughter Mélanie after the Mélanie in the book.
So you wrote that book and then you wanted to name your kid Melanie?
Yeah, well, because I like the character Mélanie, and I always liked the name Mélanie. So for those reasons, yeah, we did that. Yeah, Bonnie.
So you mentioned the series. Can you talk a little bit about the series?
So the series is Malcolm and Mélanie Rannoch are former spies in the Napoleonic Wars. And they, at this point in the series, it's out in the books that Mélanie was actually a French spy for the Bonapartists, and Malcolm was a British spy. And when they got married, he didn't know she was a French spy. And they were married for, yes, Mélanie?
How did you get the idea for like the part in the book of having the Glenister papers maybe be missing?
Oh, pen papers are missing because I want. That's a good question. Because I wanted secrets that were going to come out, and I wanted to bring Lord Glenister into it, and I wanted the secrets of his past to be part of the story. And so it occurred to me that if he was afraid his enemies had papers, that would get him to go to Malcolm, who he doesn't entirely trust at that point.
Oh, that
So,
makes sense.
so at this point in the series, Malcolm has known the truth about Mélanie for about a year and a half. It's the September of 1819, and he found out right before Christmas in 1817, in the book called The Berkeley Square Affair. And wait a minute, yeah, right before it turned 18, yeah, so yeah, before it turned 1818. And they've got through it pretty well, considering it was a big thing to get through, because he's a spy himself. But they're still dealing with some of the issues from that. And then in this book, she deals for the first time in this book, she's dealing with his past, which is Kitty, and not just that Kitty was his former love, but Kitty, I think as you start to see, Kitty was a spy herself, and Kitty has her own secrets and her own agenda, and and Kitty has come to London wanting Malcolm's help with something that she's going to ask him for in the next scene.
So what was the first book? What year did it start?
So I started the series. Their names were actually. I started the series in, I think the first book was originally called Daughter of the Game, and then it was republished The Secrets of a Lady, and that was in 2000 and And then,
And what year did it take place in?
oh, in it's 1819, but the thing was, I then switched publishers, and I went back in time, and I actually changed the main characters' names. And with a book called Vienna Waltz that came out in 2011, March of 2011, and with them at the Congress of Vienna. And then I went forward in time, and it's kind of a parallel universe to the first two books I had written, because eventually I wanted to take their story forward. So the Malcolm and Mélanie Rannoch story, so far has gone from 1814 to now we're in 1819. So,
And how many book-length books in it?
in it so far? So Vienna Waltz, Imperial Scandal, the Paris Affair, the Berkeley Square Affair, the Mayfair Affair, London Gambit, Gilded Deceit, the Duke's Gambit, and Glenister Papers 9.
Wow.
Like books.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very
In
good.
about, like one a year, basically, for those
Right.
years. So, and as it happens, when I did my book event at Book Passage in Corvadera for Vienna Waltz in March of 1811, it was on a weekend, and the Monday after that weekend, I found out I was going to have her later that year. So her life is very much tied up with the books being written.
She's too cute. She is too cute.
Thank you.
Too cute. Very, very good. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
I was invited by the people here because I come here and buy books all the time.
Very nice.
I
That's
do my
great.
artwork in the park. In
Cool.
the park. I do a lot of artwork, and they told me you were going to be here, and this is I've never heard of her. You need to come and check her out. No, I haven't.
No, I'm not surprised.
And I'm
yeah.
being honest, but I'm saying I
Yeah.
am very overwhelmed.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet. Thank you for coming. I
Oh
really
yeah.
appreciate it. It's great. It's really great. to
I
be
like
here.
this stuff.
Cool. Thank you,
Soothing,
Dan.
very soothing.
I know from college days or maybe before that you have a very specific interest in this period of history.
Right.
But as your novels are evolving and people are moving along in their lives,
Yeah.
do you ever think about the possibility of getting to the end of that era, historically speaking, and sort of stepping out of it into whatever comes next?
No, I mean, I'm very into the world of these characters, and I keep discovering new things, and I have a lot of ideas going forward, so I have thought about writing, or sort of taking the series up to when their kids are, like the 1832 revolution in France, and some of those things, I thought about incorporating those into the series, but I'm pretty rooted in this world right now, at this point. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just aware that you have cultivated readership all around the country, perhaps the world, and that you're really good at keeping them interested. And so how did you learn how to do all that? It seems really essential these days for an author to do that and to remain connected with their audience, because their audience can be anywhere, not necessarily local. How did you know how to do that? You seem to do it quite well.
That's great. I don't know that I do know how to do it exactly. I think all the authors I know were kind of all, when I first started writing, there was no internet. And when I was first published, there was not with these books, but when I wrote before, I wrote with my mom originally. And you basically got snail mail letters from your readers occasionally. If they sent it to your publisher, and then your publisher would forward it to you, and you maybe went to conferences sometimes and met readers, but I mean, there was no interaction. You only saw other authors at conferences, and then all of a sudden there was, I remember I went to a conference in the 90s, and I came back, and I said to a friend who worked in tech, Terry used to work with Jim, I said, I think I need to get a website, but I'm afraid email is going to be too hard. He kind of laughed, and he's like, no, trust me, you can do it, it's not that hard. And in fact, a friend of his now has done my website for years, and it was wonderful. So, I got online. It was great. I love being able to, it's great to write alone, but it's wonderful to be able to interact with the readers. I love interacting and talking about the book, so it's fun. So I would, go on to Twitter and Facebook and talk about the books. I liked blogging, so I started blogging early. I haven't blogged quite as much since I've had Melanie, but And I love when people comment on the website, and I genuinely like to have conversations. So if people ask me things or comment, I tend to go back and talk more. And then I have a reader who set up a group about the series on Google Plus that now we have on Goodreads. And that's been really great because people can communicate, and I've actually gotten to meet some people and made friends with people through that, including one of whom sent us lovely flowers, and I met one with her family at, we went to Muir Woods a couple of years ago, and we went out to the Pelican Inn, which is a model for an inn that's in one of the, that's what I call the Pelican Inn, that's in one of the books, so that was really fun. So, yeah, I don't know that there's the way is kind of to be online and on different platforms and make yourself available and be, you know, willing to talk to people. And some people, it's tricky because social media can really suck up your time, as everybody knows. But I find it very energizing. I think some writers find it exhausting, you know, but I actually enjoy it. I love talking about books, and so if people want to talk about them either in person or online, I love doing it. That's really fun. And then it's, you know, jumping on, my daughter teases me for taking so many pictures, but it's, you know, it's like jumping on Instagram or whatever it is and posting things, even if it's just quick, but just making sure you do that. I did a thing with this last book that seemed to work well, where I would go onto Twitter and I'd post quotes as I wrote, and I'd hashtag them with the title and work in progress. And I try to post quotes that were intriguing, both to people who were reading the books who wanted to know what it meant, and then to people who didn't know them, just like, what's that about? And so that sort of was a fun thing, and it was quick, I could do it quickly, but it was a fun way to communicate. Yeah.
Maybe I should have asked this first, but what is it about this particular historical period that so fascinates you or appeals to you?
It started with because of Jane Austen and Georgette Heyer she passed away some time ago, but she wrote starting from the 30s to the 70s or 20s to the 70s in that era. But I think it's an era kind of on the cusp of change. My college history work was on the late 15th century, which is also kind of on the cusp of change between the medieval era and the modern era. And then this is kind of, you're on the cusp between the French Revolution and the Victorian era, between the 18th century and the dawn of industrialization. And so things are changing. I mean, people are still fighting with swords sometimes, and yet you've got factories starting, and you've got the sort of rural agricultural shift, and you've got these shifts in mores. I mean, you've got the very body 18th century in the background, and then you've got the Victorian era coming up, and it's kind of somewhere in between those two. So it's fun because you have elements of both, and it's fun to watch that change unfold. And that, I think, that intrigues me about it. And you're between the classical era and the romantic era, so it's sort of in all different ways, in politics, in music, and art, and literature. You're in between interesting things. Yeah, Bonnie.
Do you want to talk about the books you wrote with your mom before?
So yeah, well, okay, and this kind of follows well. I started out writing what are called there's a whole genre called Regency romances that are set in this era that are kind of inspired. They're very much inspired by Georgette Heyer, who was a lot inspired by Jane Austen, and they're romances that are kind of tend to be comedies of manners. And my mom and I started writing them. Our first book was published in 1988 when I was a senior in college. And I wrote 8 books with her before so I was really into this era. And then the idea for the series actually came through a book that we actually never published, but that had a subplot with 2 spies, with a French spy named Mélanie, who almost married a young British diplomat whose name was Charles, which was Malcolm's name originally. And when we were writing the book, I thought, if these people actually got married, it would be really interesting to see what would happen in about 5 or 7 years, because she actually kind of does like him, and she's not a bad person, and it would just be interesting to see what he would do if he ever learned the truth. And I thought, but that would never really work as a romance. It's like too out there. But I kind of was at the back of my mind, and that was, and then about years later, I got the idea to write that as a thriller, and then that was the start of the series. So it's interesting because I didn't start it till after my mother had died, but it kind of grew out of an idea I got when I was writing with her, which was interesting.
Originally, their names were Charles and
Mélanie were their names originally, and then in this series, they started out in the Rannoch books. They started out as Malcolm and Suzanne, but then I and it was funny. I actually, speaking of, it was a copy editor I had before Eve. I had a typo where Suzanne's maid, who knew her before, who knew the truth about her, started to call her Mel. And the copy editor thought that was supposed to be her real name. I thought, well, yeah, of course it is. Suzanne was the name she used in her masquerade when she married Malcolm, and then Melanie's her real name. So then eventually, when the truth comes out, she became Melanie. So then now in the series, she's Melanie again, which I liked because I couldn't ever quite. Her full name is Melanie Suzanne, but yeah, I got her back to being Melanie. Which was neat.
Any more questions?
Where's my? There, Melanie. I think pretty soon it's gonna be time for you to do the closing.
But my friend's using the bathroom.
Okay, so let's
I'll
ask
wait a
one.
couple minutes.
Well, we'll wait a couple. Does anyone want to ask one or two more questions? While we wait for Serena and Melanie to come back.
Yeah,
Okay.
where did you go to school? Oh,
No, that's
Where
fine.
did you
Great.
study?
I went
Or
to.
hail from?
I grew up in Marin. I live in Nicasio in the house my
beautiful.
parents built. That I grew up in, that I inherited from my parents. Melanie likes to tell people that her grandparents built the house for us, which is kind of true.
Beautiful.
And I went to Marin Academy, where I met my friend Bonnie, who's here, and then I went to Stanford.
Super.
So I stayed. I've been.
And
really
so
happy
you
there,
said
yeah.
you started writing with your mom when you were in college.
I did. Actually, I actually started writing with my mom. We started plotting our first book on a vacation when I was 13.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, did you
there
start
you go.
before?
Yeah, exactly. And we wrote that book off. We worked on that book off and on while I was in high school. She was working full time, and then when I was in college, her job had come to an end, and I came home once for a break, and she said, I'm going to go back to that book we were working on. I said, oh, that's cool. Let's go back to it. And then we ended up selling it while I was in college.
Wow.
And you took turns writing chapters, right?
We took turns writing chapters. Yeah.
Do you think you'll ever write a book with Melanie?
I would love to. I mean, she's writing stories. She came up with her first really kind of original story over the holidays this year. We wrote it down, and with like not a story about herself, with like made up characters and a plot. And yeah, I would love to write it with her. And she says she wants to be a writer, so we'll see if that stays.
Oh,
It's
you
very
can help
cool
our
at this point.
preteens. You're such a great educator.
Oh, that'd be fun.
That would
Yeah.
be wonderful.
And you must be
Inspire
so
them.
organized because, I mean, you've written so many books, and yet I know you have another job, and you've got a 7-year-old who, so give us some tips on how you stay so organized and get everything done.
Well, sometimes I write it. Sometimes the time I find to write is between midnight and 2 in the morning.
Yay.
I do things in bits and pieces. I use time. I try to write 1,000 words a day when I'm writing, and I don't always do it. But if you can average 1,000 words a day, then that's 30,000 words in a month. Or say you write 20 days in a month. You've got 20,000 words in a month. Well, a book is around 120, 130,000 words. You have to have time to revise. But 1,000 words a day is pretty doable. And then, and sometimes it's just like, okay, I've got to write 100 words because the first 200 and 300 are the hardest usually to get down, and then after that it usually gets going better. So I'd say the biggest thing is doing it a bit at a time. And I sometimes think I was really lucky I went into writing right out of college because I was used to having papers to work on and projects, and they had to get done. And I had just done an honors thesis, so that was a big project that you had to do over time. And it's also sometimes, especially when she was little, it was grabbing minutes to write. Like I would go in, we would hang out a lot at the village, and we'd be at the Pete's at the village, and I would write there. We'd go to the little playground. We used to go into Pottery Barn Kids, which used to be there, and they had all these toys that were out that kids could play with. And I would like stand up and I'd write maybe 100 words while she played with something, and it's things like that. Or it's, you're waiting between emails and you find time to write a little bit, something like that. Yeah. Serena?
Can you read some more now?
Oh no.
No, honey,
what?
but I'll read a little bit to you at the end, okay?
Okay.
Okay? After what people want.
Thank you.
Read a little bit more. Thank you, though, for wanting that. That's very cool.
Sorry, she was using the bathroom.
That's okay. That's no problem. Okay. Does anybody have any more questions? Anybody?
And she had a little problem finding out how to get this ink going.
Oh, okay. I can understand that. This can be tricky.
I needed help her.
That's okay.
Thank you, Melanie.
Okay. Thank you for helping, Melanie.
Melanie, I know you want to do the closing. I'm going to say something really quickly, and then you're going to be the final person, so we
Okay.
can all remember how great you are. Okay?
Au contraire, there are going to be 2 final people.
Oh, Oh, is Serena gonna do it too? Okay,
All right, okay.
Yeah, we'll let Cheryl talk.
Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your support of Book Passage, but especially the supporting of very talented authors, local authors. You know, we here we are in Marin County. We have all these talented people.
Wow.
Tracy Grant, you are a local author. We are thrilled to have you. Thank you very much. We have her book for sale at the register, and she's going to stay up here and sign books. And how lucky are we to have another budding author, Melanie, with us? Hopefully in about,
Wow.
I don't know, 10 years, we'll be back here to listen to your book. You'll be doing an author reading, and we'll listen to your book. But Melanie's also an author, and she'll be signing, maybe she'll be signing Tracy's books as well. So you'll get 2 signatures. But again, we ship everywhere in the country. If there's a friend of yours who would love this book, and I know there's plenty of people who would, graduation, Father's Day, all kinds of reasons to buy books. Get a book for a friend, for a loved one. Tracy's going to personalize it. We will gift wrap it, and we will ship it out. It's the best gift around. So again, thank you for coming. And now Melanie and Serena.
That was an amazing chapter. Those were amazing chapters. This book was amazing. I think that when you read the entire thing, you'll find out a lot and a lot more good stuff about it. And now Serena. Well, it was nice to have you on stage anyway.
Do you guys both want to say thank you in unison? You want to say it together?
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Credits made by Tracy Grant and Melanie Cordelia. Yeah. People the person who wrote the book. Tracy. The end.
Thank you very much, all of you. I really appreciate you coming, and thank you, Cheryl, and everybody at Book Passage for hosting us. It was wonderful.
Yay.
Oh, and if you're listening to this on Facebook and you're interested in ordering a book, I can come back and sign more copies, and I'll put information on my Facebook page. Thank you for watching.
Also, can I get this book?
You read. It was great.
Oh, cool.
Great
Good.
setup.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.